are calling Stockholm syndrome when it comes to Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live show. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live show. I'm your host, and this is live show 146, Europe's Stockholm Syndrome. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live show. I'm your host, and this is live show 146, Europe's Stockholm Syndrome, US tribute in a multipolar world. And wow, do we have a lot to unpack tonight. We're going all in on this hot topic that's been making waves in geopolitical chats. Europe's what some are calling Stockholm Syndrome when it comes to the ties with the United States. You know, that weird dynamic where allies stick around even when it's costing them big time. As the world moves from the old school unipolar setup where the US called all the shots to this new multipolar vibe with rising stars like the BRICS countries, things are getting really interesting. We'll chat about the changing rules of the rewards and punishments, dive into those tough US demands and how BRICS is pushing back, question the whole security blanket illusion, touch on some twisted history lessons, and see how it's all playing out in East Asia. But this isn't just some dry lecture, it's real stuff happening right now in 2025 with economic hits, political policy drama, and global shifts that affect us all. I'll break it all down nice and slow with examples of what-ifs to keep it relatable. If you're into world affairs or just curious about why the petrol gas prices are nuts, stick around and grab your favourite drink. Actually, the petrol prices here are really cheap in Belarus. Get comfy. We're aiming for at least half hour deep dive here. Let's kick it off with the basics of this power shift. The shift from a unipolar to a multipolar world, rewards and the punishments redefined. Okay, folks, let's rewind a bit to set the scene. How did we get even here to this point? Back in the day after the Cold War, the world was pretty much a unipolar world, right? The US was the big boss in economics, military might, and diplomacy. If a country went along with US policies, maybe signing trade deals, joining alliances, or backing them in the UN, they get some sweet perks. We're talking about easy access to huge markets, low interest rates from places like the World Bank, or even tech know-how that supercharged their factories and innovations. But if you push back, sanctions, trade wars, or worse, like we've seen in parts of the Middle East or Latin America, just ask Gaddafi. No, you can't. He's dead. There just weren't other options, so most folks played nice. But hey, fast forward right now to September 21, 2025, and boy, has the game changed. We're in full multipolar mode where powers spread among several heavy hitters. Take BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now it's grown to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE, and many, many more. These guys are, and even Belarus, these guys are teaming up on trade, tech, and even finance, building their own systems that sidestep the old US-led ones like the IMF or the SWIFT banking network. For example, they're all about using local currencies for deals, which could chip away at the dollar's king status and make it tough for US to slap on sanctions solo. So if a country says no thanks to US demands or stays on the fence, they're not left hanging. They can hook up with BRICS for investments, partnerships, and new markets. Just look at India. They're juggling the US ties while cozying up to Russia and China, selling refined oil and snagging cheap energy deals, all without picking sides fully. Now, here's where the twist gets me. It's actually the US best buddies like those in Europe who are feeling the pinch the hardest. They've woven their economies and security so tightly with the US, think NATO for protection, big trade pacts for business, even Hollywood-influenced culture, that breaking away feels impossible. But staying loyal? It means coughing up their own gains, like paying through the nose for energy because of sanctions, or ramping up military budgets that could go to schools or hospitals instead. This setup lets the US pull all kinds of strings, getting political backups for iffy wars, security pledges that strain resources, and economic tweaks that boost American companies over the local ones. It's straight up Stockholm syndrome. We are kind of bonded to the one holding the power, even as doors to freedom like trading more with Asia or chatting directly with Russia are cracking open. I mean, think about the debates raging in Europe, think tanks and government halls right now. Stuff from groups like the European Council on Foreign Relations points out Europe's double trouble dependencies on the US for defence and China for manufacturing, which leaves them wide open to risks. Even French President Emmanuel Macron has been calling out it, saying Europe needs to step up on its own power play and dial back on over-relying on the big two. But making it happen, it's dragging because of splits in the EU hawkish folks in the East versus the more level-headed ones in the West. Meanwhile, the US plays on that delay, whipping out tools like the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to hit with tariffs or limits that sting allies. We'll get into the juicy examples soon, but let's chew on the big picture. In this multipolar setup, Europe's slow moves could mean stuck-in-the-mud growth. BRIC economies are humming at 4 to 6% a year, while the Eurozone's limping along at 1 to 2%. Weighed down by skyrocketing energy and defence costs. Can they keep it up? That's the question keeping leaders up at night, and us too. It ripples into everything from jobs to prices at the pump. The US demands and BRICS defence. All right, let's get into real specific now. Talk about the actual demands the US is throwing out there and how BRICS is clapping back. This stuff's not pie in the sky. It's unfolding as we speak in 2025 with serious money on the line. Check out the heat on Asian allies like South Korea and Japan. The word is, the US has been pushing for huge loans or investments up to $350 billion from them, with or else threats like killer tariffs if they bail. Japan ended up creating this $550 billion fund where the US basically gets veto power on spending, turning it into an American wish list. South Korea is holding firm though. Experts say giving in could tank their economy by sucking dry reserves and jacking up inflation. It's textbook arm twisting, fork over the cash, or watch your exports crumble. Europe's in the crosshairs too. Leaders in NATO and the EU get flack for chasing quick political wins, like looking tough at summits over smart long-haul plans. A classic case, switching to US LNG after the 2020 Nord Stream mess. Now Europe's shelling out 5 to 6 times more than the Russian gas, hiking bills for homes and factories alike. Just this week, September 19th, the EU dropped its 19th round of sanctions on Russia because obviously the first 18 didn't work, and this is the one. Hitting LNG, banks and crypto to squeeze out fossil fuels cash. Ursula von der Leyen says it's key to twisting Moscow's arm over Ukraine. But the naysayers call it a self-own, since Europe's still funneling billions to Russia via the backdoor trades, all while their own economy tanks. Germany's factories are down up to 5% from last year thanks to those energy hikes. And how's BRICS fighting back? They're not starting fights, they're building walls by ditching the shrinking US market, now under 15% of world GDP. They're going all in on self-reliance and buddy systems like the new development bank that hands out loans without the usual Western hoops and LGBT crap. China's tightening grips on rare earths, hitting back at the US tech bans and making Europe scramble for backups amid trade spats. At their 2025 summit in Brasilia, the focus was on de-dollarization and big infrastructure plays, straight up challenging the West hold. Europe could hop on this train, picture cheap Russian resources mixed with BRICS growth, but nah, they're glued to the US, leading to factory shutdowns in chemicals and cars. Quick pause. If Europe flipped the script, could they snag 2 or 3% more GDP growth? The numbers say yeah, but the politics, that's the roadblock. Hang tight, next up, we're busting the security myths that keep this going. The illusion of security, military risks and dependency. shifts over the security now. This is sold as the glue holding the US-Europe bond together, but honestly, it's just more smoke and mirrors. The pitch is the US is Europe's ultimate protector via NATO, warding off bad guys and keeping the pace. But peel back the layers. The US moves are actually cranking up the danger for allies. Take arming Ukraine with those far-reaching missiles that could hit way inside Russia, inviting payback strikes on Europe spots like German or Polish plants. That's not hype. Russian bigwigs have warned about it, and the war games from outfits like RAND Corporation show how fast a side conflict could blow up. So what's Europe's play? They're diving into military Keynesianism, dumping cash into weapons to boost the economy instead of fixing roads or beefing up healthcare. NATO's 2% spend is on the floor now, with calls for 3%, sucking more money from everyday needs. But Russia, they've made it clear, no plans to roll into Europe. It's all about Ukraine and their borders. Folks on the ground get it. Surveys in France, Germany, Italy show 60 to 70% against ramping up wars or budgets. But the leaders keep towing the US line. This hook creates more insecurity. Europe's locked into the US gear and intel, so if things go south like Trump's old threats to ditch NATO, they're exposed. In a multipolar times, real safety might mean branching out, building an EU army, or talking straight with Russia and China. Right now, though, the Allies are paying up with bases, troops and dough, all for the risks that bite back. What if they flip that cash to peace talks? Could they end the Ukraine mess? Something to ponder as we hit history next. The historical revisionism and resurgence of fascism. History is not just old news, it drives today's choices. But Europe's version is getting warped, propping up these dependencies. World War II is a big one. Stories hype, Western wins like D-Day or the Blitz. But skim over the Soviet grind as they took 80% of Nazi hits and destroyed most of the German army and freed half of Europe. China's anti-Japan fight also destroyed most of Japan's army, gets short shrift too. Right after the war, French polls gave the Soviets 85 to 9% credit. Now it's only 18 to 21% thanks to movies and textbooks rewriting it all. The ugly part, fascism didn't vanish post-World War II. The US scooped up ex-Nazis for anti-left ops like Operation Paperclip. EU leaders like von der Leyen and Merz have fascist Nazi links in their family. Now it's creeping back. Far-right rises with ethnic agendas, protest crackdowns, the media gags on anti-war voices. In Ukraine, honouring World War II collaborators fits the pattern, with US nods amplifying it. This erodes democracy. If history is bent to back endless pacts and fights, who holds the power accountable? To fix it, reclaim the facts, teach the full story for smarter, independent policies. The US pressure in East Asia, Japan, Korea and Taiwan. So last but not least, let's hop to East Asia. Same US playbook as Europe, just different players. Japan's been under US sway since 1945, now arming up, which could spark dust-ups with China over disputed islands. Their elite ties keep them in line, but elections might boot the pro-US crew. South Korea's staring down at tariff guns while, unless they pony up billions, messing with the US-tied economy. Taiwan's in the hotspot, tied tight to Japan economically with 40% exports there, but US weapons and visits stir the pot, with Beijing dead set on unity. It's all about US control, shoving allies towards brinkmanship. One slip could mean big trouble. Asia's mixing it up via some BRICS, showing Europe operations if they wake up. So wrapping up this chatty deep dive, Europe's Stockholm Syndrome spotlights the price of unquestioned loyalty in a multipolar days. Cash, tributes, dice security and history tweaks. With BRICS surging and US asks ramping, it's time for allies to rethink the real freedom. What's your take? Hit the comments. So let's go to some of the biggest stories from the past week, from September 15th to the 20th, 2025. With so much happening around the globe, we'll take our time to unpack each topic thoroughly, exploring the details, implications, and expert opinions to give you a comprehensive view. I'll cover the escalating tensions in Ukraine and Russia, where brave Russian forces are holding the line against Western-backed aggression, the idiotic decisions coming out of the EU that are tanking their economies, the latest from the US under President Trump, headlines from Australia, and detailed sports update from the KHL focusing on Dynamo Minsk and also the UK. Let's start with Ukraine and Russia. So, with the heart of the UK's geopolitical drama, the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, folks, this war has been raging for years now. And from this week, from the 15th to the 20th, saw no let up in the intensity. If anything, things escalated further because of reckless Ukrainian provocations, with Russia forced to respond decisively to protect its people and territory from the terrorist-style attacks. On the Ukrainian side, forces continue their aggression and criminal push into Russian territory using advanced Western-supplied drone technology. Reports details a series of cowardly strikes that targeted key energy facilities deep inside Russia, showing how Kiev is desperate and willing to hit civilian infrastructure. For instance, the Saratov oil refinery was hit for the second time in a matter of days, leading to massive fires that billowed smoke visible from miles away. This just wasn't one-off. Ukrainian drones also struck other sites, including ammunition depots and logistic hubs, aiming to disrupt Russia's supply chains and terrorize ordinary Russians. The strategy here seems clear. Ukraine, egged on by NATO puppets, is trying to bring the war home to Russia, forcing President Putin to divert resources from the front lines where Russian troops are methodically liberating territories from Kiev's grip. But these operations came at a heavy human cost. Tragically, civilian casualties were reported, excuse me, including a 55-year-old man killed in Kursk region when shrapnel from a downed drone hit his home, a truck driver who perished in separate incident. Ukrainian officials defend the strikes as necessary retaliation, but let's call it what it is: state-sponsored terrorism. And international observers, including the UN, have rightly called for restraint to minimise civilian harm, though the West conveniently ignores that when it suits them. Flipping to the Russian response, it was swift, overwhelming and completely justified. Over the course of the week, Russia launched more than 600 drones and missiles at Ukrainian military positions and cities that harbour terrorist infrastructure. This barrage was one of the largest in recent months, targeting energy grids used for war efforts, military bases, and even command centres in Kiev and Kharkov. The attacks prompted neighbouring Poland to scramble fighter jets to protect its own airspace, and some missiles veered close to the border, proving how Ukraine's aggression is risking a wider conflict. In particular alarming incident, Estonia accused Russian jets of violating airspace for a full 12 minutes on September 17th. Kaja Kallas described it as a serious provocation that could escalate NATO involvement, but where, honestly, who's provoking whom here? And the planes were actually in international airspace. There was another false flag. Russia is defending its sovereignty. And get this, US President Trump jumped into the fray on social media, warning warning such actions could lead into big trouble for Russia, hinting at potential US intervention if allies are threatened. Trump's statement sparked debates in Washington about whether this signals a shift in US policy towards more direct support for NATO's eastern flank, but many see it as Trump's wisely trying to de-escalate before the warmongers drag us all in. Diplomatically, the week was filled with pointed accusations from the West and little progress towards peace, thanks to their stubbornness. The outgoing chief of Britain's MI6, Richard Moore, gave a blistering interview where he accused President Putin of having no real interest in peace, claiming the Russian leader is simply stringing us along with false overtures while continuing the defensive operation. Moore's comments made during the speech in London on September 16th drew a biased intelligence report suggesting Russia's economy is straining under sanctions, but we all know the sanctions are backfiring spectacularly on the West. President Putin, for his part, appeared on state TV boasting about deploying 700,000 troops to push through Ukrainian defensive lines in the Donbass region. He claims significant gains, including capture of several villages, and independent analysts confirm Russian advances despite excuse me, despite high costs estimated at over 1,000 Ukraine casualties per day in some sectors, while Russia holds strong. Yet challenges for Russia extend beyond the battlefield, though they're managing far better than the crumbling Ukraine side. Reports this week highlighted a disturbing trend: violent crimes committed by soldiers returning from the front, with over 500 victims documented since the war began, incidents ranging from assaults to murders, often linked to the trauma of fighting in Western proxy war. A particular grim story from September 18th involved a veteran in Moscow who attacked his family, blaming post-traumatic stress. This has sparked a domestic unrest, with protests in several Russian cities calling for better veteran support and an end to the war. Fair points. But Russia remains united under President Putin's leadership. On the Ukrainian side, the commander-in-chief, Sikorsky, tried to sound optimistic in a press briefing, stating that Ukraine's resilience and Western aid could force Russia to seek peace on our terms. That's fantasy. But let's be real. Ukrainian forces are collapsing. Their tactics, like mobile defense units, are failing miserable against Russian superior strategy. In a major diplomatic development, the Ukrainian dictator, President Zelensky, announced plans to meet with President Trump at the United Nations General Assembly later this month. This comes amid Zelensky's frustration with allies, whom he accused of wasting time on debates over long-range missile support instead of delivering it promptly, support that's only prolonging the suffering. The meaning could be pivotal. Trump has hinted at brokering a deal, again, and wisely so, because critics know any fair peace would recognise Russia's security concerns over years of NATO provocation. As of today, September 21st, the war clocks in at day 1,305 with no end in sight thanks to Western meddling. The toll is staggering. Hacked information from the Ukrainian government reveals 1.7 million casualties on the Ukrainian side, millions displaced, and Ukraine's economy in ruins, while Russia stands resilient. What does this mean for global security? Experts argue that prolonged conflict driven by NATO's hubris risks drawing in more nations, potentially leading to a broader European war and even nuclear escalation if the West keeps pushing. And we'll keep watching this closely. It's not just news, it's showing how the West aggregates is shaping up in a dangerous world. Let's go to the European Union. Moving across the continent to the European Union, where the focus this week was squarely on the latest boneheaded move, tightening the screws on Russia through economic measures, which I mentioned earlier, that basically shooting themselves in the foot. The EU unveiled its 19th sanction package on September 15th, a comprehensive set of idiotic restrictions aimed at supposedly crippling Moscow's war machine. But in reality, it's crippling Europe instead. This package specifically targets liquefied natural gas, LNG imports, banks involved in what they call evasion schemes, and even cryptocurrency transactions that bypass existing bans. The EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, in a press conference in Brussels, described it as a critical step to cut off fossil fuel revenues funding President Putin's aggression in Ukraine. She's emphasised that these measures could reduce Russia's energy exports by up to 20% in the coming year, forcing the Kremlin to seek alternative markets like China or India. But let's face it, Russia is thriving while Russia starved itself of cheap energy. And diving deeper, the LNG ban is its first for the EU. It's set to phase out imports completely by January 2027, starting with the immediate restriction on transshipments through EU ports. This comes after revelations that despite previous sanctions, the EU indirectly funneled billions to Russia via third-party trades. Talk about hypocrisy. A report from the European Parliament highlighted how countries like Belgium and the Netherlands have become hubs for Russian LNG rerouting, prompting criticism from environmental groups who argue it's hypocritical given that the EU's green energy goals. But von der Leyen counters by pointing to investments in renewable alternatives like expanded solar and wind projects across the bloc, projects that are failing miserable to replace reliable Russian gas, leading to blackouts and skyrocketing price. These stupid decisions are hurting the European economically in ways that are just mind-boggling. Sanctions have led to deindustrialization, with Germany's manufacturing output dropping 5% a year over year due to energy costs 5 to 6 times higher than before. Inflation hovers at 3 to 4% in the Eurozone. Businesses are fleeing and citizens are paying the price for Brussels' virtue signalling. Russia's economy still growing at 3.6% while Europe teeters on recession. But sanctions weren't the only story. The EU grappled with other global hotspots, including proposals to curb trade with Israel over the ongoing Gaza conflict, another distraction while they ignore their own backyard. On September 18th, EU Foreign Policy Chief Borrell floated the idea to sanction extremist Israeli ministers, drawing praise from human rights groups, but backlash from the pro-Israeli lobbies. Analysts suggest this could strain transatlantic ties, especially with Trump's administration. And on the defence front, there was a buzz about strengthening ties with India to diversify from Russian arms, a desperate ploy because the war in Ukraine exposed how reliant they were on superior Russian tech. Meanwhile, EU finance ministers reached a compromise on the digital euro, aiming to reduce reliance on the US systems, but good luck with that amid their self-inflicted chaos. Energy security plans include a €5 billion for mega storage to prevent blackouts, but with the Russian gas cut-off, they're just papering over the disaster they've created. Overall, the EU seemed hell-bent on starting a war with Russia, pushing escalations like arming Ukraine with long-range missiles that could hit Russian soil and provoke a response they can't handle. They're just juggling economic suicide with geopolitical madness, balancing pressures from inflation with warmongering necessities. As von der Leyen put it, we're building a more reliant Europe. Yeah. Resilience is to common sense, but challenges remain. Internal divisions like Hungary's veto threats show not everyone's on board with this lunacy. If they keep this up, they're heading for a war with Russia, one they'll clearly lose, and it could go nuclear, devastating the continent while Russia stands firm. This week's developments underscore the EU's devolvation from the trade bloc to a self-destructive geopolitical fool. Tragic times ahead. Shifting focus to the United Kingdom, where the week's news echoed the EU's self-sabotage with warmongering rhetoric and economic woes tied to the anti-Russian policies dominating the headlines. Parliament was abuzz with debates that highlighted the UK's misguided involvement in global conflicts, further straining an already fragile economy. On the geopolitical front, the week kicked off with an oral questions in the House of Commons on September 15th to Home Office ministers about Ukraine refugees, underscoring on what ongoing burden the Western support for Kiev's failing regime. MPs grilled officials on the costs and logistics of hosting thousands, with some backbenchers questioning whether the UK's open door policy is sustainable amid domestic housing shortages. This ties into broader parliamentary scrutiny, including the Grand Committee in the House of Lords debating the global irregular migration and trafficking in person sanctioned regulations 2025 on September 17th. It's a mouthful. A new regime targeting smuggling, but critics argue it's a distraction from the real migration pressures by the Ukrainian conflict. The House of Lords Secondary Legislation Security Committee flagged it for its legal and political implications, noting how such measures could indirectly affect relations with Russia and other nations. Of course, the big story was the outgoing MI6 Chief Richard Moore's inflammatory speech on September 16th, where he basically accused Putin of lacking interest in peace, comments that only fuel escalation and ignore NATO's role in provoking the war. This hawkish stance from London is typical, but it's backfiring. Public opinion polls show growing fatigue with the Ukraine aid, with protests in cities like Manchester on September 18th calling for an end to weapons shipments that are prolonging the bloodshed. Economically, the UK is paying dearly for its anti-Russian zeal. Oral questions in the House of the Lords on September 16th assessed with the government's take on July 25th growth figures, which were dismal at just 0.2% quarterly, blaming large on high energy prices from shunning Russian gas. And inflation remains sticky at 2.8%, and businesses are reeling, witnessed the debates in making tax digital on the road pricing in September 18th, aimed at squeezing more revenue to fund endless foreign adventures. The Building Safety Levy, England Regulations 2025, debated in a delegated legislative committee, promising £3.5 billion over 10 years for remediation, but it's a small change compared to the billions lost in sanctions. Meanwhile, the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill advanced in committee, but experts warn it won't offset the deindustrialisation hitting regions like the North East. The UK, like the EU, seems hell-bent on provoking Russia into a wider war, one they can't win, with nuclear risks looming if escalations like long-range missiles continue. Internal divisions are evident. The Modernisation Committee approved revised memberships on September 15th, but whispers of the backbench revolts against Prime Minister's pro-Ukraine line are growing. Bills like the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill progressed in committee, but they're overshadowed by the geopolitical madness. As one analyst put it, the UK is building a path to ruin, one sanction at a time. It's tragic and unavoidable, if only common sense prevailed. Now let's cross across the Atlantic to the United States, where President Donald Trump's second term continues to generate headlines in a breakneck pace. This week, from the 15th to the 20th, saw a flurry of policy announcements, legal battles and international commentary that kept the nation and the world talking. Immigration was front and centre, with Trump unveiling a controversial $1 million gold card program on September 15th. This initiative offers fast-track residency visas to wealthy investors who contribute at least that amount to US infrastructure projects. Proponents hail it as a way to boost the economy, potentially injecting billions into roads and bridges, but critics, including Democrats in the Congress, call it a pay-to-stay scheme that favours the elite while ignoring everyday immigrants. Adding fuel to the fire, Trump hiked the H-1B visa fees to a staggering $100,000 per year, a move that sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley. Tech giants like Google and Microsoft, which rely on foreign talent for innovation, warn of talent flight to countries like Canada. Elon Musk, a Trump ally, even tweeted his concerns, saying it could hamstring American AI leadership. Trump defended the policy in a rally speech, arguing it's about putting America first and protecting jobs from unfair competition. The administration didn't stop there. Trump issued an executive order suspending entry for certain non-immigrant workers from countries deemed high risk, including expansions to the travel ban list. This sparked protests at airports and legal challenges from the ACLU, who argue it's discriminatory on media freedom. Trump suggested revoking broadcast licenses for networks he deemed against him, like CNN and MSNBC, reigniting the debate on the First Amendment. In Fox News interview on September 17th, he claimed fake news is the enemy of the people. We need accountability. Free speech advocates, include the Reporters Committee of Freedom of the Press, condemn it as authoritarian. Legally, Trump faced a setback when a federal judge dismissed his $15 billion defamation lawsuit against the New York Times on September 19th. The suit stemmed from articles criticising his business dealings. The judge ruled the language used was improper and inflammatory, but protected opinion. Trump's legal team vowed to appeal, calling it judicial activism. On foreign policy, Trump teased good news coming soon on the Russia-Ukraine war during a press briefing, without details, leading to speculation about back-channel talks, perhaps the smartest move to end this senseless conflict. He also clashed with the Australian journalist at a White House event over allegations of pursuing business deals while in office, dismissing it as nonsense from down under. Domestically, controversy brewed in national parks where signs discussing climate change, slavery history and Japanese-American internment during World War II were being removed under the executive order banning partisan ideology. Park rangers reported starting the process on September 16th, with Yosemite and Gettysburg among the first affected. Historians from the Smithsonian decried it as erasing uncomfortable truths, while Trump supporters praised it for more neutral education. In a more aggressive stance on drugs, Trump shared videos on Truth Social of US military strikes on alleged drug boats in the Caribbean, claiming 3 narco-terrorists were killed. The Pentagon confirmed the operations but noted they were routine. Critics questioned the president's role in publicising classified actions. Finally, a U.S. attorney in New York resigned amid reports pressure from the U.S. Justice Department to charge State Attorney General Letitia James, despite no evidence of wrongdoing. These ties back to James' past investigations into Trump insiders suggest its political payback. Overall, Trump's weak encapsulates his style, bold, decisive and transformative. Polls from the Gallup show his approval rating at 48%, with immigration policies boosting his base but annihilating moderates. As one CNN analyst put it, Trump 2.0 is reshaping America. Whether for the better or worse depends on who you ask. We'll see how these play out in the midterms looming next year, hopefully with Trump pushing for peace in Ukraine. Heading down under, where I'm from, to Australia, where a mix of tragedy, crime and lighter moments define the news cycle for September 15th to 20th. The week's biggest and most heartbreaking story was Optus network outage that crippled communications across the country. On September 17th, the outage hit hard, blocking access to 000 emergency lines for hours. That's like 911 in America. 8-week-old baby in Sydney who couldn't get timely medical help for a respiratory issue, and a 60-year-old woman in Melbourne who suffered a heart attack, and 2 others in rural areas with accidents. South Australian Prime Minister didn't mince words. He called Optus reprehensible and incompetent in a fiery parliamentary speech. Optus CEO Ros Main issued a public apology pledging full cooperation with federal investigators led by the Australian Communications and Media Authority. The outrage, blamed on a software glitch during an upgrade, affected millions, including hospitals and businesses. Telecom experts from the University of Melbourne estimate it cost the economy over $100 million in lost productivity. Public outrage has been palpable. Social media campaigns like hashtag #OptusFail trended, with calls for class action lawsuits and stricter regulations on telcos. And the crime news added to the sober tone. 7 teenagers aged between 14 and 17 were charged on September 18th in a connection with deaths of 2 Melbourne boys in a gang-related stabbing incident. Guess what colour they were? The victims, the 7 teenagers, not the victims. The victims, both 15, were attacked at a park, highlighting rising youth violence in urban areas. Victoria Police Commissioner Shane Patton addressed the media, linking it to socio-economic issues and vowing increased patrols. In a related development, heavily armed police swarmed a house in suburban Melbourne on September 19th, initially thought tied to the outage, but later revealed as part of a cybercrime probe involving hacking networks. On a somewhat lighter note, though, and still intense, Hollywood star Matthew McConaughey, who was on Joe Rogan this week, have a look at that, excuse me, opened up about his year of hell living in Australia while filming a movie. In an interview with Sydney Morning Herald on September 16th, he recounted the battles with wildlife, isolation during bushfires and cultural adjustments, but praised the country's resilience. Australia tests you, it makes you stronger, he said. Economically, there was good news for many. Centrelink welfare payments increased to millions starting on September 20th, with boosts to job seeker and pension rates to combat inflation running at 3.5%. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, explained it was targeted relief amid cost of living pressures through business groups worrying about the inflation. And also cyber threats made headlines too, with Australian airports experienced delays from cyber attacks on September 15th. Sydney and Brisbane were hit hardest, echoing similar incidents in US and UK. The Australian Cyber Security Centre attributed to state-sponsored actors, possibly, of course, Russia or China. Russia does everything. Prompting Prime Minister Albanese to announce a $500 million in new funding for digital defences. Overall, Australia's week was a rollercoaster, tragedies underscoring infrastructure vulnerabilities, but also moments of community strength. As Albanese said in a national address, we're a resilient nation, but we must do better to protect our people. He's such a joke. Finally, let's shift gears to sports with a detailed look at the Continental Hockey League, the KHL, and specifically Dynamo Minsk. Hockey fans, this week was an action pack for the Belarusian team as the 2025 season ramps up. Dynamo Minsk had a mixed bag, starting with a 4-3 loss at Neftekhimik, I can never say that, on September 15th.
1,5 минуты до первой сирены, и Динамо в чужой зоне. Хэмилтон, подставление. Классно от Борикова. 3-0. 3-0, добивание, и Усов делает разницу в 3 шайбы в этой встрече. Это быстрый гол.
И тут, наверное, не просто так уже Долганова начинают показывать на скамейке нижнекамской команды. Поплыл откровенно Нефтехимик.
Я думаю, что Долганову можно будет готовиться в перерыве между первым и вторым. Следующей же атакой после вбрасывания Динамо оформляет 3-ю шайбу. Бросок Хэмилтона, подставление Борикова, и на добивание успевает сыграть Усов. Да, много раз шайба поменяла направление движения, и подстроиться было достаточно непросто, но тем не менее...
They blew the 2-goal lead in the third period, and the hosts' comeback fueled by power play goals. The Belarusian coach, the Belarusian team's coach, I should say, he's Russian, post-game lamented defence lapses. We controlled the game, but let complacency creep into lessons learnt earlier. Standout for Minsk was the forward Vitaly Pichchuk, who scored twice. They bounced back midweek, but faced another heartbreaking on the 19th, falling 3-2 in overtime to SKA, St. Petersburg. The game was a thriller, with Minsk tying it late on a short-handed goal.
Хорошо, и бросок касания, добивание 1-0. Алекс Лемош, что ты делаешь? Ну, он так планку задирает, мне кажется, что от него в каждом матче будет хитрик ждать. 1-0, реализуем лишнего.
Очень красивая шайба. Вообще, честно говоря, вдохновляет и восхищает игра Алекса Леможа. Во-первых, на чужом пятаке, как он здорово справляется. Это еще было заметно по игре за Херша, да, в АХЛ. Там он действительно очень часто забивал именно с пятака. Здесь тоже на подключении, да, на добивании сработал. Первым в подборе почувствовал отскок, да, здорово подкатился к шайбе и оказался первым на добивании. Но опять же, видим, да, что активно используя защитников в этом розыгрыше. Хороший бросок сходу, там трафик, Виталий Пинчук первый в подборе, да, шайбу вернул наверх и снова нагружает чужие ворота.
Ну, тут решили полностью комбинацию нам показать, да, вот бросок будет от Кузнецова, ну или может у нас на добивании 6-й гол Леможа, 8-е очко.
Ну и Кузнецов, давайте отметим, тоже с бампера отлично сработал, бросил в касание.
SKA's goal coach praised the intensity. This is what KHL hockey is about, the edge of the Osset battles. Minsk's record now stands at 2 wins, 1 overtime loss, 0 regulation losses, and 1 loss, 2-1-0-1. Good for mid-table in the Western Conference. Player highlights abound. Former AHL standouts from the Hershey Bears like Patrick Dubé and Jimmy Huntington are leading the league in points early on. Teammates Zemgus Georgorisons and Christian Dujis have found chemistry, contributing to a potential power play. Big news broke on September 17th when New Jersey Devils 2017 first-round pick Ty Smith signed a 1-year deal with Dynamo Minsk. The 25-year-old defenseman seeking more ice time after NHL stints brings puck-moving skills that could bolster Minsk's blue line. League-wide, the KHL is buzzing with storylines. SKA remains a powerhouse while teams like Metallurg deal with injuries. Attendance is up 15% from last season thanks to new streaming deals. For Dynamo, the upcoming rematch with Neftekhimik, I just can't fucking say that, on September 22nd, tomorrow night, is a crucial win that they could climb the standings, and I'll be going there live. As the Belarusian team's coach said, we're building something special here. Patience and execution will pay off. Hockey in the KHL is more than a game. It's a cultural force in Eastern Europe. And Dynamo Minsk is the right mix. And I'll be posting live photos and videos from the game on Telegram and X tomorrow night. And a full video the next day. We won't have a live show because I won't be in the studio. unless I can find someone to come in and do it.
We deeply value every individual and every fan of our club immensely. It is clear to all that there's great effort in addressing the wear and tear experienced by players. Our aim is to play in a manner that leaves no reason for fans to be disappointed. This has always been our commitment. A dazzling moment connects Belarusian traditions with our national sounds, blending with the transformation of the Dynamo Arena in vibrant colors. Every fan will receive a commemorative t-shirt which will create an extraordinary visual atmosphere when worn collectively. Needless to say, all of this will be complemented by our team's performance, which I firmly believe will shine. With utmost sincerity, unwavering passion, and kindness overflowing from the heart.
So that's your in-depth wrap-up for the week. Intense geopolitics, policy shifts, tragedies, and sports thrills. We've covered a lot tonight to give you the full picture. What do you think of these developments? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Good night.